In the shadow of a setting sun, Emily crouched low in the barn. Dust motes danced in the fading light, swirling silently around her. She pressed her back against the cold wooden wall, her heart thumping wildly in her chest. The sweet scent of hay surrounded her, but panic spun in her mind like a whirlwind. Just hours earlier, she'd been on her family's quiet farm, tending to the horses. Everything had felt so normal. She brushed Flicka, her spirited mare, listening to the soft sounds of the farm, the distant mooing of cows and the rustle of leaves in the soft breeze. But now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, her familiar world was anything but safe. The day had begun like any other, but then she'd overheard something she shouldn't have. Emily had slipped into the barn to grab a new saddle and paused when she heard voices. They were hushed, full of urgency. Her father's deep baritone mixed with an anxious whisper that belonged to someone she didn't recognize. "We have to keep it quiet." Her heart sank. She strained to hear more, but the words were clipped and harsh, and all she could grasp was the tension. The last thing she wanted was to get involved, but curiosity pulled her closer. When her father walked away, she dared to peek out from behind a stack of hay bales. That's when she saw him, a man with sharp features and a hard expression. She didn't know who he was, but something within her screamed that he wasn't there for good reasons. Emily's instincts kicked in. Heart racing, she slipped deeper into the barn, thinking it was just a precaution. She could hide, hear what they were talking about, and then decide what to do with the knowledge she acquired. But as the minutes went by, she felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The barn felt smaller, the shadows darker, and her breaths came faster. The man's voice rose in anger. "I know you're hiding something." Emily prayed her father could keep things under control, but a knot twisted in her stomach. The last time she had seen him that upset, it had been about the farm finances, a struggle that had painted their lives with daily stress. Now this unknown man was digging into something deeper, something darker. Suddenly she heard the man's boots crunching closer, and instinct took over. Emily darted into the far corner of the barn where Flicka was tied to a post. The horse stamped her hooves, sensing the tension in the air. Emily shushed her, gently running her hand along Flicka's neck. But horses, like people, have their own instincts. Flicka was skittish, and the mood in the barn had her on edge. Emily's pulse quickened as she crouched low behind a pile of hay, hoping against hope that she could time her escape. The man's footsteps fell heavily, thudding in her chest like a hammer. She peered out from her hiding place, her heart caught in her throat. His eyes scanned the barn, piercing through the darkness. "Check in here," he called out to her father. "No, just leave it be," her father insisted, but desperation crept into his voice. The confrontation had escalated quickly. She could sense that things were spiraling out of control. Anxiety twisted her stomach like a vice. Then with a loud whinny, Flicka moved her head, exposing Emily's hiding spot. Fear washed over her as the man spun, eyes wide with realization. He stared right at her, and for a moment everything froze. Emily felt as if the world around her had come to a standstill, life, time, and sound all hanging by a thread. She didn't wait to see if he'd call for help. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she bolted from behind the hay. Emily dashed for the barn door, heart racing, breath coming in quick gasps. But as luck would have it, the man lunged forward. She felt the air shift as he reached out, his fingers nearly grazing her sleeve. He shouted, and she nearly stumbled as the fear drove her faster. With Flicka behind her, Emily burst through the door and out into the field. The vast openness felt like both a blessing and a curse. She could run, but she wasn't safe yet. The man was right behind her, his determination echoing in her ears. Emily sprinted towards the tree line, heart pounding like a drum. Trees reached up like fingers, beckoning her into their embrace, and she ducked and weaved, seeking cover among the thick trunks. As she ran, she felt her breaths get quicker, desperation flooding her mind. She couldn't think of anything but escape. She heard her father's voice, urgent and frantic. Her heart sank at the fear in his tone. She could hear the man approaching him, could imagine the frustration and anger twisting on his face. But she couldn't go back, not now. The adrenaline pushed her forward, deeper into the woods. Branches scratched her skin, and she stumbled, but she didn't stop. A sudden thought flickered in her mind. Why was the man even there? What had he wanted? The answers swirled around like loose leaves in the wind, but there wasn't time to ponder. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. Breathless, she finally found a clearing, the moonlight spilling through the canopy. It was quieter here, with the sounds of the night wrapping around her like a blanket. For now, she could hide. Breathing heavily, she sank to the ground, trying to calm her racing heart. But in her moment of solitude, realization hit her. They were after something that involved her family. Panic surged anew as she thought of her parents, caught up in something dangerous. They were helpless, and she felt an overwhelming need to protect them, even from afar. As she crouched there, Flicka's soft whinny broke the silence, sending a rush of unease through Emily's body. Had they followed her, would that man find them? The night's stillness shattered as branches snapped in the distance. She could hear voices approaching. Searched the area, it was the man. Her heart dropped, fear gripping her. Suddenly, a sharp crackle of sound startled her. Were they getting closer? Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to remain quiet as the shadows closed in. As their voices grew louder, they burst into the clearing, her father and the men who chased her. Emily held her breath, willing herself to blend into the darkness. "She has to be around here somewhere," the man said. Her father's voice was tense. "You don't know what's happening here." The man laughed. "Family. You've hidden something from me, and now I'm going to find it." Fear coursed through Emily. Something inside her screamed for her to act. She could not let them take her father or threaten her home. She needed a plan. As they walked past her hiding spot, Emily felt a surge of determination. Could Flicka help her? Horses had a powerful bond with humans, and she knew Flicka would do anything for her. Crouching low, Emily called softly, "Flicka, come on, girl." Flicka stared at her, her eyes wide. The horse was trembling, the shadows casting an eerie silhouette across the clearing, but she didn't budge. "Come on," Emily whispered again. With a deep breath, Emily rose slightly and motioned for the mare to follow her. Flicka's ears perked up, and with a gentle nudge, she slowly trotted over to Emily, sensing the urgency in her voice. Emily took a moment, letting their connection strengthen. This was their family bond, the trust they shared. "We can do this together, Flicka, I need you," she whispered. Just then the man turned. Emily's heart raced. She had to move quickly. She urged Flicka as she leapt atop the mare. With one swift move, she took off, spurring Flicka forward into the night. The man shouted. The sound of thudding hooves filled the air as she raced through the night, the branches whipping past them. As they galloped, Emily felt the thrill of freedom intertwined with fear. Could they really escape? Flicka thundered forward, her powerful legs propelling them further into the woods. The moonlight illuminated their path, and for a fleeting moment Emily felt alive, her worries melting away. But the man's voice echoed in her mind, a reminder that danger was close behind. She whispered urgently. They pushed through the darkness, each step pulling them further from the danger. Suddenly, Emily spotted a side road, a place to cut across the fields and back toward the house. She yelled, guiding Flicka toward the path. They tore across the open land, the cool wind whipping through her hair. As they reached the edge of the grass, Emily's courage ignited. This was her home, and her family would remain safe. But as they neared the house, a new realization hit her like a jolt. They weren't alone. More shadows danced across the yard, more men encircling her father as he stood at the front steps. She shouted, but her voice broke against the sound of the wind. Flicka slowed as they reached the edge of the property, and Emily's heart sank when she saw her father's expression, fear mixed with something she couldn't quite place. They were trapped. With a surge of bravery, she willed Flicka forward, even as the men turned to face her. She yelled, feeling strength building in her core. The man she'd seen earlier sneered, stepping closer. In that moment, Emily found clarity. The mare whinnied and charged forward with all her might. The men scrambled back, surprise painting their faces for just a moment too long. Emily felt the rush of power. She was a force to be reckoned with. They surged through the crowd, and with a swift motion, she reached her father, who stood firm despite the oncoming threat. She cried, and he nodded, understanding what she was asking. Together, they fought against the men, Emily using her instincts to guide Flicka and her father, drawing strength from their unity. As the chaos unfurled around them, the men faltered in their pursuit. Emily's fierce resolve lit a fire in the air, and soon enough they began to retreat, fear painting their eyes as they stepped back. In the end, they fled, disappearing into the shadows. Emily and her father stood breathless but together. The night was still, the danger seeming to melt into the dark. Emily turned to her father, tears spilling from her eyes. He pulled her into a tight embrace, and she could feel the warmth of his heartbeat against her. "I know, but you were amazing," he whispered. They stood there among the fading light, the bond between them stronger than ever. Emily's heart swelled with pride, but she also knew that their lives had forever changed. What had begun as a normal day on the farm had unraveled into a tapestry of danger and courage. But for now they were safe together in their beloved home with Flicka beside them, a reminder that sometimes in the darkest of times, the light shines brightest when we act with love and bravery. The moment Sarah heard the heavy footsteps thumping against the barn floor, her breath caught in her throat. She crouched low behind a stack of hay, heart racing like a wild rabbit. The faint scent of fresh straw and the earthy aroma of the horse lingered in the air, but all she could think about was escaping the chaos that had shattered her peaceful afternoon. Just hours before, she had been in the warm sunlight, brushing her beloved horse, Daisy. The barn was her sanctuary, a place where her troubles melted away with every stroke of the brush. But that tranquility shattered when she overheard voices, a heated argument just outside the barn doors. "We need to find her before it's too late," a man's voice had hissed, dark and full of urgency. Sarah's heart dropped. She didn't understand the full meaning of those words, but the fear in the man's tone sent chills down her spine. She peered through a small crack between the bales, her pulse quickening as she caught sight of two men standing just outside, their faces shadowed but their anger palpable. "Are we really doing this?" A second voice replied, trembling with anxiety. Her mind raced. "Get away, you have to stay hidden." The barn had always been her safe harbor, but now it felt like a trap. Pressing her back against the rough wood, Sarah felt the atmosphere closing in, thick and suffocating. She wished Daisy could sense her fear, that the horse sitting quietly in the stall beside her could somehow shield her from the danger looming outside. With each moment that passed, her heart pounded louder in her ears. She had to escape. She could not allow herself to be found. Taking a deep breath, she glanced back at Daisy, who stood still, eyes wide and alert. Time stretched as she listened to the men's footsteps pace uncertainly. It was in this frozen moment that she realized how much she cared for her horse. They had shared so many quiet moments together, but now was a time for action. Daisy neighed softly, and the sound broke through the tension like glass shattering. Fear shot through Sarah as she glanced again at the door. The lead man stopped dead in his tracks, turning toward the sound. Desperately, Sarah looked around, clutching the cold hay tightly. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't reveal her position. The very last thing she needed was for those men to discover her here, hidden among the bales of straw. "Come on, let's check the barn," the first man said, anger creeping into his voice. Panic surged through Sarah. There was no time to waste. She had to move, find a way out before it was too late. But where could she go? The barn was a maze of shadows, and she knew it well, but it felt like a prison now. The men stepped inside, and Sarah barely breathed. She watched them from her hiding spot, their faces twisted with intent. They were searching for someone. Had they come for her, or was it someone else? Her mind raced, trying to find a moment of clarity in her fear. Suddenly, Daisy let out another startled whinny, and the men whipped around, their expressions hardening. The lead man shouted, pointing toward her. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach as she realized Daisy had just given her away. In a blind panic, she bolted from her hiding spot, racing toward the far end of the barn. The man yelled, chasing after her. With terror spurring her on, Sarah dashed through the barn, weaving between bales and other stored equipment. The tang of hay filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic scent of fear that clung to the air. She had to think fast. A rush of adrenaline propelled her legs forward as she ran toward the back door, where the shadows were thickest. Would she make it? But no sooner had she reached the door than she felt a hand grab her shoulder, yanking her back. She gasped, stumbling into the solid form of the man who had chased her. He sneered, triumph flashing in his eyes. With a struggle, Sarah twisted away, her instincts screaming to escape. But she knew she wouldn't be able to fight him off for long. She couldn't stay here, not now. In a moment of desperation, she glanced back at Daisy. The horse was watching, her ears pinned back, sensing the rising tension. Sarah cried out, instinctively trusting the bond they shared. Daisy whinnied again, a sound that pierced through the chaos, and in that instant, something incredible happened. The horse charged forward, breaking through the stall gate and running straight towards Sarah and the man gripping her. Sarah's heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. Would Daisy save her? The man stepped back in surprise, and in that fleeting moment, Sarah took her chance. She darted past him, grabbing Daisy's mane and leaping onto her back just as the man stumbled, shocked by the sudden whirlwind of motion. Sarah yelled. With Daisy galloping forward, they shot out of the barn, the cool night air wrapping around her like a shield. Freedom was just ahead, but she could still hear the man's furious shouts behind her. Daisy surged with power and grace, her hooves pounding against the earth as they raced across the sprawling fields. Every beat of the horse's heart echoed Sarah's own, and for a moment she felt truly alive despite the danger chasing them. But as they broke into a clearing, Sarah spotted headlights flashing in the distance. Were they coming to help her, or were those the men returning with allies? The thought sent a wave of dread through her. She urged Daisy. The horse responded, her determination merging with Sarah's resolve to escape. "We can do this." The wind whipped through Sarah's hair as they thundered down the path, the world a blur of greens and browns. Her heart raced, the adrenaline pushing her forward, but fear crept in again when she heard the unmistakable sound of boots pounding behind her. They were close, too close. Glancing back, Sarah saw a figure emerging from the shadows, the lead man now gaining ground. He yelled, "Stop her." Daisy wouldn't quit. She kept running, but Sarah could feel their energy waning. They had to find somewhere to hide, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. Just ahead lay an old twisted tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like arms. Sarah spotted a small hollow at the base, a possible refuge. She shouted, guiding Daisy toward it. They galloped into the sheltering darkness of the tree, and as they ducked inside the hollow, Sarah leaned down to comfort her brave horse. "You did incredible, Daisy." She could hear the men's angry voices growing closer, their footsteps crunching on the leaves surrounding them. "She's got to be around here somewhere," one of them grumbled. Split up, the realization that they might soon be found sent daggers of fear through Sarah's spine. She held Daisy close, heart pounding, and thought of her family. Would they come looking for her? Would anyone know she was in danger? The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as they waited in silence. The men's voices echoed around them, and every laugh or taunt made Sarah's heart race. Would they be discovered? Would they even make it home? She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She remembered the nights spent in the barn with Daisy, the bond they had formed over years of trust and love. "This isn't just about us now," she whispered to her horse. "We have to get back to the house." Breathlessly, she glanced outside through the narrow opening of the hollow. The moon illuminated the path, painting the woods in a soft light, but she feared what lurked beyond that gentle glow. Time stretched on, but then just as tension threatened to choke them entirely, the sounds of the men walking away started to fade. Let's check the other side of the field, one of them suggested. Relief surged through Sarah, but it came with a fresh wave of urgency. She knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. "We have to move, Daisy," she whispered, and the horse seemed to sense her determination. As dawn crested the horizon, Sarah and Daisy crept out of their hiding spot, the world beginning to wake around them. Bounds of the farm flourished, birds chirping, the far-off lowing of cattle. With every step, the shadows receded behind them. "Let's go home," she said softly, reluctance creeping in. But she knew she couldn't return to the barn just yet. They needed a safe way to get back. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed through the trees, and Sarah felt her heart drop. The men had turned back, voices carried through the air, searching for her again. This time, she didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, she leaped onto Daisy's back. She urged, and the mare took off like a bullet, charging through the trees with fierce determination. Branches whipped past them as they raced forward, the village now locking onto their desperate escape. Sarah urged Daisy, her mind screaming for a way out. Nerves ignited her courage, and for the first time she felt the raw strength that lay within her. This wasn't just about running away anymore. It was about protecting her home, her family, and the life they had built together. Each stride covered ground, and the morning mist began to lift. The sunlight stretched into golden rays, illuminating the forest ahead. In that moment, hope ignited within her. They could make it. Finally, they reached the edge of the tree line where the fields opened before them. Sarah let out a yell, "Almost there, Daisy," but with a twist of fate, something unintended happened. As they burst into the field, a group of figures emerged from the opposite side. Sarah's heart plummeted as the men spotted her, ready to chase again. Just as panic threatened to take over, she felt Daisy surge with fresh energy, running faster toward the farmhouse. It stood proud on the horizon, her sanctuary, her safe place. The familiar sight ignited warmth in her chest, urging her on. "Please let them be home," she prayed. As they thundered across the open land, Sarah blinked back tears, the fullness of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could see her father and her brother out front, their faces etched with concern as they sprinted toward her, realizing the danger she was in. Her father shouted, his voice strong and unwavering, "Get to the house." Daisy didn't slow. Sarah felt the raw power of the horse beneath her, a bond forged through every shared moment, every secret story behind barn doors. Together they raced towards safety. Just as they reached the porch, the men braced themselves, preparing to pursue once more. But Sarah's father stood firm, his presence a wall of protection. "You will not touch her," he declared, voice booming. The men halted, caught off guard by the sudden determination standing before them. Words flew between her father and the man who had chased her, voices rising, tension cracking in the air like lightning. In that moment, the lines were drawn clearly. This was a stand. The farm, it was theirs, and they wouldn't let anyone take it from them. Heart pounding, Sarah climbed off Daisy, who stood valiantly beside her. She felt the weight of the situation, the fear that had knotted in her gut replaced by a deep, furious strength. Hand in hand with her father and brother, she faced the men who had intruded upon their peace. "You will leave," she declared, her voice steady, not just for herself, but for everything they had built together. "We're not scared of you," her brother chimed in, his resolve shining through. The men hesitated, glancing at one another, now understanding the gravity of their situation. They had underestimated the power of family, the fierce love that fueled their fight. With a defeated grunt, the lead man turned, leading the group back into the shadows from whence they came. "This isn't over," he sneered, but something in his voice was lost. As silence returned to the farm, Sarah felt her knees weaken, but her family was there, grounding her with their strength. Relief crashed over her, mixing with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had escaped, and Daisy had been her champion, her partner. It was the connection forged in fear that strengthened their bond forever. Her father asked, kneeling beside her, his eyes searching hers. "I'm fine," she whispered, almost surprised at her own calmness. As the sun broke fully above the horizon, Daisy nuzzled against her shoulder, and Sarah wrapped her arms around the horse's neck. Together they stood facing the new day, the weight of darkness lifting behind them. And within the bounds of that barn and the soft pasture, she knew one thing for certain: they would always stand strong together, confronting whatever challenges lay ahead. The love they shared would always be their greatest strength. The barn door creaked as Sarah slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the sound of footsteps approaching, heavy, purposeful. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the slats of wood, and the earthy scent of hay filled her lungs. Tension hung in the air, thick enough to slice through. Just moments before, she had been blissfully riding her horse, Daisy, across the familiar trails of their family farm. The world felt open and free, but that all changed when she saw them. The two men in dark jackets lurking by the old fence, whispering urgently. Something dangerous flickered in their eyes, and instinct screamed at her to run. Now here she was, crouched behind a pile of hay bales, frozen in fear. "Think, Sarah," she muttered to herself, trying to shut out the sounds of her heart racing. The footsteps grew closer, and she pressed herself against the cool wood of the barn, praying they wouldn't hear her. "She can't be far, we saw her come this way," one voice said, low and menacing. "Just search the barn," the other replied, a hint of anxiety flipping through his tone. "I'm tired of this game." Panic surged inside Sarah. Whoever these men were, they meant business. The men drifted closer, their shadows stretching menacingly across the barn floor. She would stay hidden, she had to. "Come on, let's check the stalls," the first man said. Sarah felt her breath come shallow. There was nowhere else to hide, they had to come this way. Then, just when she thought she might burst from fear, Daisy let out a soft whinny from her stall. Panic shot through Sarah like a bolt of lightning. "No," she hissed under her breath, but it was too late. The men immediately turned toward the sound. The second man shouted, and terror washed over Sarah as she realized Daisy had given her away. Without thinking, she bolted from her hiding place and dashed for the far end of the barn. The old wooden door loomed ahead, and she could feel the cool breeze of the outside calling her closer. Would she make it before they could grab her? The first man yelled, urgency cracking in his voice. Sarah sprinted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She burst through the door, and the daylight hit her like a wave. She half turned to look back, but all she saw were the looming figures of the men rushing in behind her. Panic welled up, she had to keep going. The field stretched out ahead of her, open and vast, flanked by the familiar shapes of the barn and the farmhouse in the distance. But as she fled, she felt more exposed than ever. Her legs pumped hard against the ground, hitting the earth with desperate speed, but dread clung like a shadow. She yelled, rushing toward the mare, who stood waiting near the fence. But in her haste, she took too long. One of the men was right at her heels, and the sound of boots clattering against the ground rang in her ears. He shouted. With one last push, Sarah reached Daisy and leapt onto the mare's back, urging her into a gallop. They tore across the field, wind whipping through Sarah's hair, freedom just ahead, but fear surged back as she heard the man's voice growing nearer. Daisy galloped like the wind, hooves pounding against the earth, but the thrill of escape quickly faded as the reality of their situation sunk in. She whispered desperately. Her heart raced not just from running, but from sheer terror. They broke into the trees lining the edge of the property, and the shadows swallowed them once more. "We have to lose them, Daisy," she urged, glancing back through the branches. The men were emerging from the field, determination on their faces. With steady resolve, Sarah steered Daisy deeper into the woods. The underbrush scratched at her legs, and branches whipped past them like a gauntlet of nature. She felt alive, but also acutely aware of the danger that pursued them. Then, something surprising happened. As they ran, Daisy suddenly hesitated, turning her head back toward the sound of footsteps behind them. Sarah begged, urging Daisy onward, but the horse was spooked, uncertain of their footing. Sarah cried, feeling desperation seep in, but as they pushed forward, something within her faltered. What if they couldn't escape? What if they never made it home? In a moment of vulnerability, Sarah slowed, turning to look back. The men were closer now, shadows in the gathering dusk. Digging deep, she felt anger replace her fear. She shouted, voice breaking. The fight surged within her. With new conviction, Sarah guided Daisy up a narrow path, frantic to find cover. They dashed toward a thicket overgrown with bushes, hoping perhaps it would conceal them long enough to regain their wits. As they reached the edge, she caught sight of an old barn, long abandoned, hidden amongst the trees. Maybe this could be their sanctuary. She shouted, pointing toward the dilapidated structure. The horse galloped toward it, and Sarah felt her heart surge with hope. Perhaps they would find safety here. But Daisy's hoof struck a hidden rock, and before Sarah could react, they both went tumbling to the ground. Fear blasted through her as she hit the dirt, breath knocked out of her. She gasped, scrambling to her feet, but Daisy was limping slightly, her leg caught under her own weight. Panic washed over Sarah. "Come on, girl." A sense of urgency wrapped around them like a tightening noose. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, and adrenaline kicked in again. With trembling hands, Sarah helped Daisy to stand, her instincts kicking in. "Just a little bit further," she encouraged, her voice trembling but purposeful. They staggered toward the entrance of the abandoned barn, slipping inside just as the men appeared at the edge of the clearing. Fumbling in a haze of fear, Sarah quickly shut the door, breathing heavily as they crouched behind old hay bales stacked in the corner. Whispers muffled their surroundings, and her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. They could hear the men searching outside, voices heavy with frustration. One snarled. Sarah's breath came quickly as she tried to steady her racing heart. She muttered to Daisy, who stood wide-eyed with fear, still trembling from the fall. The cold air in the barn wrapped around them, thick with tension. Then quietly the men began to call out, and their impatience grew. "She can't hide forever." Desperation hung in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on Sarah's chest. "Daisy, we need to get out of here," she whispered, looking around for another way out. Her fingers brushed across the splintered wood of the barn. A sudden voice pierced the silence. It was one of the men signaling to his partner. Fear horrified her. "We have to go." Sarah urged Daisy, leading her toward the back of the barn, praying they'd find a way out before it was too late. But Daisy seemed frozen, ears perked up, eyes wide with anxiety. Sarah realized that her beloved mare sensed the danger more acutely than she did. "Please, girl, I need you," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. In that instant, it struck her this was not just about running. This was about the bond they shared, one that had deepened over years of understanding and trust. "You're strong, Daisy." Heart pounding, she shoved open a creaky trapdoor behind them. It led down into the dark, dusty cellar beneath the barn, and she took a deep breath. Would they find safety down there or just another trap? As they descended, darkness enveloped them and the musty smell of the cellar filled the air. The sound of muffled voices drifted down from above, mingling with the echo of their trembling hearts. "I won't let them take you, I promise," Sarah whispered to Daisy, reassured by the presence of her horse. Just then a thud echoed above them and the men's voices grew louder, more urgent. One shouted. Anxiety twisted Sarah's stomach and she felt stars dancing in her vision. They had to hurry. Feeling the pressure rise, Sarah led Daisy deeper into the darkness, searching for any way out. But as minutes ticked by, hope wavered. Was this the end? How long could they hide? Suddenly, a glimmer of light flickered through a narrow opening at the far end of the cellar. She exclaimed, heart racing again. Sarah guided Daisy toward it, nerves tightening. As they approached, she could hear the men above shifting, searching. Sarah hissed, urging Daisy forward. With quick breaths, they burst through the opening, emerging into the cool night air outside. The stars above twinkled like gems scattered across a velvet sky. They had made it. The fear was still raw, but the exhilaration of freedom surged through them. They raced through the tall grass, heartbeats matching the pounding of Daisy's hooves. "We just have to keep moving," Sarah said, forcing her fears aside. As they dashed through the fields, Sarah felt courage filling her. This was home, the sprawling land she had grown up on, where every blade of grass felt like a friend. She refused to let anyone take it away. Rushing as fast as they could, she kept glancing back, hoping they wouldn't give chase. But the sounds faded, the darkness swallowed her pursuers, and she hoped they had lost them once and for all. Then, just ahead, the comforting silhouette of the farmhouse appeared, glowing in the moonlight. Sarah shouted, urging Daisy forward, the light of safety guiding their path. With each step, the weight on her shoulders began to lift. They could make it. As they burst onto the porch, she jumped off Daisy, her heart swelling with relief. "We did it, girl," but it wasn't finished yet. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed once more, and that pit of fear returned. She swung around, breath hitching in her throat, realizing the men were following them. She shouted, and Daisy nudged her, sensing the urgency in her voice. Together, they flew through the door as the men reached the stairs. With a slamming of the door, Sarah locked it tight behind them, heart still racing. But now there was something different in her. They were safe. She had faced down danger and come out the other side with her loyal horse by her side. Gathering her scattered thoughts, she turned to Daisy, who was trembling but spirited. "You were amazing. I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said, running her fingers through the horse's mane, feeling her heartbeat settle. As she leaned against the door, her family rushed into the room, their faces painted with a mix of concern and relief. Her father asked, worry etched into his brow. "They were looking for me," Sarah explained, tears welling in her eyes. "But we got away. Daisy helped me." Her voice trailed off. "It's okay." "You're safe now," her mother reassured her, wrapping arms tightly around her. In that moment, Sarah realized that they had faced darkness together. They had fought back. The bond she shared with Daisy was more than horse and rider. It was a connection forged in trust and bravery. And from that day forward, the barn became more than just a place to ride. It stood as a reminder of their courage, of the bond that could not be broken. They might have faced danger, but together they could conquer anything. As they sat together in the dim light of the living room, Sarah felt a warmth in her heart. She was not just a girl hiding in a barn anymore. She was a fighter, an unstoppable force beside the friends she loved. And with Daisy by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and Sarah slipped into the dim light of the barn, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She pressed her back against the cool, rough wood of the wall, desperately trying to calm her breath. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field, but she was hidden away from the world, crouched low amid the bales of hay. The muffled sounds of shouting erupted just outside, their anger spilling through the cracks. A voice growled, filled with frustration. Fear gripped Sarah. Who were they? She had seen the two men earlier in the day, lurking by the old fence, their eyes scanning the land like predators. But it wasn't until now that she realized they were hunting for her. Suddenly, the sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the silence, sending panic surging through her veins. She swallowed hard. She had to stay quiet. One of them yelled, and dread washed over Sarah like a cold wave. The barn had always been her sanctuary, a place where she felt safe with her horse, Daisy. But now it felt like a trap built out of shadows and suspense. She quickly glanced around but regretted it. She pressed her hands over her mouth, willing herself to breathe softly to stay invisible. "Let's hurry," the first man said, his voice heavy with impatience. As the heavy footsteps approached, Sarah closed her eyes, summoning all the bravery she could muster. She thought, remembering how this day had started like any other. She had been riding Daisy under the open sky, cherishing the freedom they shared. But then she noticed those men, their faces dark and hungry with malice. When she realized they were heading in her direction, her heart had dropped. This isn't right. Instinctively, she had bolted for the barn, hoping it could shield her. Yet here she was, heart racing as shadows crept closer. She listened as the men entered the barn, their voices echoing off the wooden walls. One demanded, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "I don't know." As they turned toward the stall where Daisy stood, breathing softly, Sarah felt ice run through her. Daisy, unaware of the danger, shifted her weight, making the wooden post creak. Sarah's heart raced again. No, then came a whinny, sharp and clear, filling the barn. The men whipped around, eyes wild. Caught between the bales of hay and the men, Sarah's breath hitched. She had to act. She whispered, knowing her horse couldn't understand her fear, but she couldn't let her be the reason for her downfall. The second man gestured toward the corner where Sarah hid. With her heart in her throat, she barely breathed, her chest tightening. Time felt frozen, the world outside fading as her fight or flight instinct kicked in. Suddenly, one of the men took a step forward, edging closer to where she crouched. "This is it," Sarah thought. "I can't let them find me." In that moment of desperation, Daisy whinnied again, stretching her neck as if calling to her owner. The men heard it, their eyes lighting up with renewed purpose. "There," the first man shouted, lunging forward. Sarah cried, adrenaline coursing through her as she bolted from her hiding spot. She dashed toward the barn door, every step echoing the panic in her heart. But halfway there, the second man reached out, grabbing her arm. With a fierce twist, Sarah broke free, flinging herself through the door and into the open air. The cool breeze hit her like a wave, but there was no time to savor it. She sprinted across the field, knowing the danger was right on her heels. She heard behind her the urgency in their voices, driving her faster. Daisy was waiting at the fence, eyes wide with concern. Sarah shouted, hoping that the bond they shared would guide them both to safety. Leaping onto the mare's back, she felt a sense of surge, the thrill of freedom coursing through her veins. With Daisy's powerful legs beneath her, they tore across the pasture, the world a blur of greens and browns, but the men were relentless. They chased after them, kicking up dirt and shouting. One called, his voice heavy with determination, but Daisy's strength knew no bounds, galloping as fast as she could, driven by the instinct to escape. Sarah urged, pushing herself forward, the wind whipping through her hair. Suddenly they reached the edge of the forest, the thick trunks casting shadows that beckoned them. Sarah yelled, steering Daisy toward the trees. They plunged into the sanctuary of the branches, the world outside growing quiet. The sound of hooves pounding against the earth was replaced by the rustling of leaves overhead. Sarah felt her heart race with both fear and exhilaration, but as they sprinted deeper into the woods, she dared not hope. "Keep going, Daisy," she urged, glancing back through the branches. The men were still coming, their anger echoing ominously through the trees. Then, as they pressed onward, Daisy stumbled, a sharp, jarring movement that threw Sarah off balance. They skidded to a halt, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. She pleaded, patting Daisy's neck, trying to soothe her frazzled nerves. The horse's breathing was labored, fear radiating between them. But the sounds of the men were drawing nearer, their shouts cutting through the forest like a knife. Breath quickening, Sarah made a snap decision. She whispered, leading Daisy off the trail toward a thicket of bushes that might conceal them. They pushed through the thick undergrowth, heart pounding in tandem with the sound of their hooves. In a moment of stillness, Sarah felt a surge of hope. They could hide here, they had to. The men's voices echoed outside, but they were further away now. Time crawled, and she held her breath, eyes wide, scanning the trees for any sign of danger. "Please, please be quiet," she urged, hold the reins tightly, heart racing. But then Daisy shifted nervously, her eyes darting toward the sound of rustling leaves. Something about the mare's anxiety sent a wave of dreadful fear through Sarah. She felt the ground shake beneath them. A figure loomed at the edge of their hiding spot, searching intently. "They have to be around here," a gruff voice snarled. Panic twisted in Sarah's stomach. They had been found, she managed to whisper. But just then her horse spooked, backed up, and nearly knocked Sarah off. She cried, holding on tightly as Daisy galloped out of the thicket. The sound of hooves pounding against the earth echoed through the trees. But it was too late. The men were shouting behind them, catching up with speed. How was this happening? With a wild rush of fear, Sarah clung tight to Daisy's mane, urging her forward through the trees, their branches clawing at her clothes as they sprinted. They broke into a clearing, but Sarah felt her hopes plummet as she spotted the men emerging from the trees. One shouted, pointing. Driven by a primal instinct, she cast her eyes around, searching for an escape. To her right stood an old, dilapidated barn, its roof sagging, but a glimmer of hope sparked within her. If they could reach it, they might just find safety. "Now," she shouted, guiding Daisy toward it, the mare surging forward with the last bit of energy she had, but flickers of doubt crept in. What if the men followed? The barn door creaked ominously as they entered, shadows falling heavily against the walls. Inside, the dust danced in the light streaming through the slats, breathing a life of its own into the suspense. Fear sent prickles down Sarah's spine as she crouched low, desperate to listen. One of the men growled, their voices echoing in the dim interior. With panic surging again, Sarah maneuvered Daisy into a corner and crouched behind a stack of hay bales. She could hear the men's heavy footsteps growing closer, dread pressing in on her like a vice. One commanded, and just as the first man stepped into the section where Daisy had positioned herself, a soft whinny escaped the mare. Sarah's heart sank. "No," she hissed, pressing her hands over her mouth. The door slammed open and the men rushed inside, eyes scanning as they searched the barn. One shouted and Sarah felt the walls closing in. The second man pointed toward Daisy's stall. Panic ignited within Sarah once more, and she dashed to the far end of the barn, her heart racing as she spotted a ladder leading to the loft. she urged Daisy. Without thinking, she dashed toward the ladder, managing to hoist herself up just as she heard the men burst through the doorway. Grab her. Time seemed to slow as Sarah scrambled to the loft, the dust swirling around her in a golden haze. She could hear the men below, heavy boots crunching against the hay as they spread out. One bellowed, frustration pouring from his words. The other replied, climbing the ladder. Sarah's pulse raced as she looked around, searching for a place to hide. But all that surrounded her were empty crates and heaps of dried hay. There was nowhere to go. Panic gripped her, but she couldn't let them find her. She heard the sound of the ladder creaking as the man climbed closer, and instinct took over. With adrenaline surging, Sarah dashed toward a window, pushing the wooden frame open wide. "Come on," she urged Daisy, who stood nervously beneath. Just as the man emerged at the top, Sarah vaulted over the edge, grabbing the side of the window and swinging herself down. Quickly, she grabbed Daisy's reins and led her away from the barn, pressing forward into the thicket once more, heart racing wildly. With each step, the distance between them and the men grew, but she didn't dare look back. All that mattered now was getting home. The woods twisted and turned as they surged deeper, darting past towering trees and thick brush. Sarah felt the weight of her fear starting to lift with each stride, and excitement sparked within her. As they emerged from the trees and back into open fields, the farmhouse came into sight. Relief washed over her like a soothing balm. She shouted, urging Daisy into a sprint, but behind them she could still hear the distant calls of the men, angry shouts filled with desperation. Sarah urged. The familiar sight of home filled her with renewed energy as they raced toward the house. Racing across the grassy yard, she jumped off Daisy just before reaching the porch. "Mom," she shouted, feeling the weight of adrenaline surge as tears streamed down her cheeks, and then she saw her family rush out of the house, worry etched into their faces. Her mother cried, and her father stepped forward, protective and strong. He commanded, voice steady and unwavering. With a near instinctual response, Sarah grabbed Daisy's reins and pulled her close, planting kisses along her horse's neck, feeling the warmth radiating through the air. "We did it, we made it," she whispered, tears of fear turning into relief. As the men approached the porch, her father stood firm, glaring down at them. "You will leave my family alone," he stated, voice full of power. The men hesitated, sizing up the situation in front of them. The contrast between their anger and the family's united front was like a wall, unyielding and strong. One of them growled before turning away, retreating back into the shadows of the woods. And as the tension melted away like morning mist, Sarah felt the warmth of her family surrounding her, grounding her in safety. Her mother asked, eyes wide with relief. Sarah started, voice shaky but growing in strength, "I'm fine." "You did great, sweetheart," her father said, wrapping her tightly in his arms as Daisy whinnied softly by her side. In that moment, everything felt right again. The barn, once a trap, now stood firm as a reminder of their bond and bravery. Sarah realized that love could carry them through darkness, light up the shadows, and create courage within. Standing strong beside her beloved horse and surrounded by her family, Sarah felt invincible. They had faced danger head-on and emerged victorious. And together they would conquer whatever lay ahead, knowing that there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The barn door creaked open, and Sarah slipped inside just as the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon. She pressed her back against the splintered wooden wall, breathing heavily, her heart racing. Outside, the world was bathed in twilight, but the barn felt like a cocoon, filled with the sweet scent of hay and the familiarity of home. But tonight, that comfort felt hollow. She had seen them two men lurking by the fence, casting long shadows across the field. Their whispered conversation carried a weight that pressed down on her, heavy and ominous. "We can't let her slip away," one had said. A chill skittered down Sarah's spine. She didn't know what they wanted, but her instincts screamed at her to hide. She'd always loved the barn, her sanctuary from the troubles of the world, where she felt safe with Daisy, her spirited mare. But now, as she crouched low behind a stack of bales, the very place that had brought her joy felt like a trap. The sound of heavy boots crunched on the gravel outside, and she squeezed her eyes shut, holding her breath. Time stretched as if the world around her had slowed. One of the men shouted, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Fear settled in her stomach like a stone, and she felt the urge to flee. Just as she teetered on the edge of panic, Daisy let out a soft whinny from her stall. Sarah whispered, her heart pounding wildly. The mare was innocent, but she could betray Sarah's position. The first man barked loudly, stepping toward the barn. The echo of footsteps grew closer, and a voice filled with menace sliced through the dim light. "Look," Sarah's heart seized. What had she done? Without thinking, she sprang to her feet, bolting toward the barn door just as it swung open, revealing two hulking figures silhouetted against the darkening sky. A cold wave of fear washed over her, and she pushed through the door, racing into the open air. One of the men yelled, his voice thick with anger, echoing off the barn walls. The ground rushed beneath her feet as she sprinted across the field. Sarah could feel the pounding of her heart, every beat a reminder of the danger hot on her heels. She had to get to Daisy, the only familiar presence that could help her now. she shouted, urging herself on. Her world was blurring into a haze of dark and light, the urgency coursing through her veins. Daisy was tied at the fence, eyes wide with concern. "Come on, girl," Sarah yelled, her voice a mixture of fear and hope. She leaped onto the horse's back, feeling her muscles tensing beneath her as they took off, running like the wind. But even as they thundered away, the sound of footsteps raced behind them. The men were relentless, their voices rising in frustration. Sarah urged, her heart racing as they burst into the forest, the trees standing tall and dark like guardians. She shouted, gripping Daisy's mane tightly. The horse galloped with a grace born from years of companionship, but the sounds of pursuit loomed close. As they plunged deeper into the woods, the fading light made it harder to see. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, praying they could lose the men among the trees. She urged, guiding Daisy toward a thicket where the branches twisted low. They burst into the thicket, the sounds of the men's shouts fading slightly, and Sarah glanced back toward the path, no sign of them yet. Breathing heavily, she patted Daisy, trying to calm both of them. "We're safe for now," she whispered. But then her heart sank as she realized Daisy was trembling, ears flicking nervously. She murmured, looking closer, but the sounds of rustling leaves grew nearer. Sarah gasped, scrambling to look for an escape route. Just then Daisy let out a whinny, startling them both. Sarah hissed, but it was too late. The thicket wasn't a great hiding place. The men's voices cut through the trees like thunder. One yelled, frustration creeping into his tone. Panic surged within Sarah, and she knew they had to move again. She cried, inching back toward the clearing as quietly as she could. Daisy, sensing her urgency, began to step back, but then she stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root, and before Sarah could react, the horse bolted back deeper into the woods. Sarah cried, chasing after her, heart racing. The men had turned in the direction of the noise, and with her pulse hammering in her ears, she pressed on. They burst into a clearing, and Sarah spotted an old barn, long abandoned, its wood splintered and fading. "There," she shouted, trying to catch up, but Daisy hesitated, digging her hooves into the ground as she recognized the unfamiliar place. "Please, Daisy," the sound of rushing footsteps echoed, urgency and danger drawing terrified lines on Sarah's face. She urged Daisy forward until they finally entered the crumbling barn. The door creaked ominously as they pushed through, and Sarah could feel the weight of the moment settle on her. Once inside, silence enveloped them, thick as fog. She quickly scanned their surroundings, searching for a place to hide. The barn was filled with shadows and the scent of decay, the air stale and cold. "Stay close," she murmured, backing up into a corner, hoping it would be hidden enough. She could hear the men's voices now, their anger echoing in the distance. Holding her breath, Sarah crouched low, glancing at Daisy, who was trembling beside her. "You were so brave, girl, we can get through this," she whispered, knowing their bond would have to pull them through. But just as Sarah thought they might catch a break, the door burst open and the men stormed inside, their faces hard and determined. One shouted, scanning the barn's interior. Fear surged through Sarah like ice water, and without thinking, she grabbed Daisy's bridle, trying desperately to keep her quiet. The mare sensed danger, her eyes wide, and just like that, the tension thickened. The lead man called to his partner, and within moments they began to search, throwing aside hay bales and crates. "Get ready," Sarah whispered to Daisy, adrenaline bubbling under her skin. Suddenly, Daisy whinnied loudly, and Sarah felt her heart drop. She hissed as the men both spun around, eyes wide with realization. One yelled, pointing towards Sarah's corner. Sarah's instincts kicked in and she jumped to her feet, heart racing as she darted toward the open window at the far end of the barn. They couldn't catch her. With every ounce of strength, she slid through the narrow opening and tumbled to the ground just outside, hitting the cool earth with a hard thud. Pain shot through her, but there was no time to stop. A voice thundered from inside the barn, but Sarah was on her feet, racing through the tall grass, Daisy's hooves pounding close behind her. "Come on, girl," Sarah cried, pushing forward with all her might. They dashed toward the tree line, weaving through branches, heartbeats matching the rhythm of their escape. The woods were a sanctuary, the shadows wrapping around them as they broke deeper into the familiar territory. But even in her escape, fear gnawed at Sarah's insides. They had to find a place to truly hide, somewhere the men wouldn't find them. Suddenly, she spotted a small cabin further down the trail, an old hunting lodge that had been abandoned for years. It was a risk, but they needed to get inside. Over there, Daisy, barking orders, filled the air behind them, the men chasing on, frustration blending with desperation. With renewed energy, they raced to the cabin, pushing through the door just before it swung wide open behind them. "In here." She breathed, leading Daisy inside. Once within, they were enveloped in darkness, the air thick with dust and memories. They could hear footsteps approaching, urgency mixing with anger. A voice shouted, and Sarah pressed against the wall, her heart racing. Daisy fidgeted, her breaths coming fast and anxious. "It's going to be okay, girl, I promise," Sarah whispered, running her fingers through the mare's mane, grounding herself in their bond. Just then the door swung open and the men slammed inside, their faces scanning the dark room. Split up, panic crashed again through Sarah as they began to search, but something steeled her resolve. She wouldn't let them take her, she would fight for her freedom. She urged Daisy, pulling her closer, then spotting a trapdoor in the corner, Sarah made a snap decision. She exclaimed, guiding Daisy toward it. Together, they slipped beneath the trapdoor, pulling it closed just as footsteps thundered above. Darkness surrounded them, the air thick with dust and silence. One of the men shouted, anger coursing through his voice. Time seemed to stretch on as they waited, breaths shallow and hearts racing, fear an inescapable shadow. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually the footsteps began to fade. Sarah could barely breathe as they dropped to silence, but then she heard a door open above them. The men had left. With shaking hands, Sarah slowly pushed the trapdoor open and peered out, scanning the room, ears straining to listen. They had to be gone. She climbed out with Daisy at her side, heart pounding with fear and trepidation. "Let's go home," she whispered, the warmth of hope creeping back into her veins. Together they ventured out, adrenaline still buzzing beneath her skin. The world felt alive again, the earthy scent of grass filling her lungs. As they stepped outside, Sarah felt the cool night air lighten her spirits, the woods surrounding her standing guard. She turned toward home, determined and grounded. As they began their journey back, the stars twinkled above, guiding their path, but tension lingered in her chest. What if the men came back? Each step felt heavy with the weight of the unknown, but together they moved through the trees, the world starting to brighten ahead. With every stride, Sarah felt more confident, and the fear began to dissipate like morning mist. Finally, the familiar outline of the farmhouse came into view, standing proud under the starlit sky. Relief washed over her like a soothing wave, and she urged Daisy onward, her heart surging with gratitude. As they reached the porch, she jumped off, rushing to the door, her hands shaking as she reached for the knob. "Mom," she shouted, worry flooding her voice. The front door swung open, revealing her family, relief flooding their faces as they rushed outside. Her mother cried, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "I was so scared," Sarah admitted, tears welling up as the tension melted away. "You're home now," her father said, squeezing her shoulder with strength and assurance. In that moment, everything felt right again. They had faced danger together, rising against fear with courage and love. And as Daisy stood beside her, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the horse, her partner in the fight. Through the darkness, they had emerged together stronger, united, and unbreakable. The barn, once a place of trepidation, stood as a testament to their resilience and the bonds that held them together. Standing surrounded by her family, Sarah knew in her heart that they could face whatever came next, side by side. Together they had conquered the night, and with Daisy as her unwavering companion, she felt ready to take on the world. The barn stood silent against the dusky sky, but Sarah's heart was racing like a train barreling down the tracks. She ducked inside, the heavy wooden door creaking as it swung open. She pushed it closed behind her, her breath shallow. The sweet tang of hay filled her lungs, but there was no time to enjoy it. She could hear the voices outside, men, angry and urgent. One voice barked, thick with frustration. Sarah's pulse quickened, a cold wash of fear enveloping her. She pressed her back against the rough wall, adrenaline surging as she stood frozen, hidden behind a stack of hay bales. Just that afternoon, the fields had felt like freedom. She had been riding Daisy, her brilliant mare, the wind tangling in her hair as they galloped through the open pasture. It was bliss, that moment of unity between girl and horse, the world shrinking to the rhythm of Daisy's hooves. But everything had changed when she noticed the men lurking near the old fence. Their eyes had locked onto her, and an instinct deep within her screamed to run. She thought, pressing her forehead against the cool wood of the barn, hoping it would grant her some clarity amidst the chaos. Another voice cut through her thoughts, sharp as a knife. "No, man, I told you." Panic swirled like a tornado inside her. Sarah's mind raced, searching for an escape. But the barn felt like a trap, a hidden cage where she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then Daisy's whinny pierced the tension, ringing through the stillness. Sarah gasped and her heart dropped. A moment of silence ensued. The men were surprised. One of them asked, stepping toward the barn. Terror gripped Sarah like a vice. Time was running out. She had to move. Without a second thought, she bolted from her hiding spot, heading for the barn door, praying to run fast enough to evade them. One of the men yelled, and she felt the cold brush of fear prickling at her spine. The barn door swung open, and Sarah exploded into the warm evening air. Her legs pumped as she tore across the field, adrenaline surging through her entire being. The world became a blur green grass, the fading sunlight and the fluttering sense of urgency rising within her. One of the men shouted, and Sarah's breath hitched as she spotted Daisy waiting by the fence, steadfast and strong. "Come on, girl," she shouted, wishing for a second that Daisy understood every word. She leapt onto the mare's back, the familiar warmth beneath her fueling her courage. With a powerful kick, Daisy surged forward, hooves pounding against the earth like thunder. They raced across the field, but the fear still clung to Sarah like a shadow. Those men were hunting her, and she didn't even know why. She urged, the wind whipping against her face, stealing her breath. In the distance, the shadows of the men moved, catching up with the speed of a storm. Sarah glanced back, panic bubbling in her chest. But Daisy was in full gallop, adrenaline pumping through her veins. With every stride, Sarah felt the bond between them strengthen, a connection forged in love and trust. she shouted, guiding Daisy toward the edge of the woods. As they crossed into the tree line, the world faded to shades of dark and light, and the sounds of pursuit became muffled. "We're safe here," she reassured Daisy, even as uncertainty twisted her stomach into knots, but it wasn't over yet. The men burst through the trees, their footsteps crashing against the fallen leaves. One of them called, and their voices sent shivers racing down Sarah's spine. She shouted, pushing her mare deeper into the woods. They rushed forward, searching for a place to conceal themselves from the growing threat. Sarah spotted an old thicket, a tangle of branches and leaves. She urged, leading Daisy toward the sheltering bushes. They slipped inside, the darkness wrapping around them like a cloak, but with every rustle of the leaves, her heart beat louder. The men were close, their voices knife-edged with frustration. "She must be nearby," another replied, and Sarah felt her breath catch. It was only a matter of time now. One of them asked, and in that split second of panic, Daisy let out a soft whinny. "No, no." Sarah's voice trembled, and she felt the adrenaline pulse through her. In a moment of instinct, Sarah grabbed Daisy's reins, pulling her deeper into the thicket. "Stay quiet," but then out of nowhere the ground shifted beneath Daisy's hooves. The mare stumbled, her panic feeding into Sarah's alarm. "Come on, girl." The men were closing in, footsteps crunching against the fallen leaves. One of them shouted. Sarah screamed, and Daisy, feeling her distress, sprang into action, bursting from the thicket toward an old barn she spotted in the distance. She directed, the adrenaline giving her strength as they dashed toward the structure. But just as they approached the old barn, one of the men locked eyes on them. He shouted. Sarah felt a jolt of fear ignite within her, and she kicked Daisy into a gallop as the men sprinted behind them. She yelled, urging her forward. The barn loomed ahead, and she dashed inside just as the men reached the entrance. The moment they entered, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the dusty floor. Sarah ducked behind the old barrels, trying to calm her racing heart. The air was thick and stale, and the sounds of the men echoed ominously as they spread out. One of the men called. Sarah's heart sank. Time was running out. She looked around for a place to hide. Her options were quickly vanishing. But just then another whinny from Daisy broke the tense silence, piercing Sarah's resolve. "No," she begged, but it was too late. Over there, the men rushed toward her, determination etched in their features. With instinct kicking in, Sarah darted toward a gap in the barn's wood, squeezing through just as the men stumbled forward. The world outside felt both threatening and freeing as she tumbled through the opening and into the cool night air. She yelled. They had to keep moving. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them, footsteps racing closer. They sprinted into the woods again, the trees wrapping around them like a protective blanket, but fear tickled her spine. She urged. She felt Daisy's energy, strong and steady, even as they pushed deeper into the darkness. The sounds of the men faded, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still close. Suddenly, off to her right, she spotted an old hunting lodge, its frame barely visible under the cloak of night. She shouted, leading Daisy toward it. They pushed through the door just as the distant shouts echoed once more, reverberating through the trees. One of the men yelled. Inside the lodge, darkness enveloped them, and the smell of mildew filled the air. The chilling reality of her situation hit Sarah, but they needed to stay quiet to remain hidden. "Just a little longer," Sarah murmured to Daisy, gripping the mare's reins tightly. The silence in the lodge felt heavy as they waited, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. Outside, the men began to move closer, their urgency rising, senses keen to catch her. One called, frustration oozing from his voice, but Sarah felt something burn inside her, an urge to fight for her freedom. She wouldn't let them take her. She would stand and face whatever came. Just then, the door creaked open slowly, and the men stepped inside, scanning the dimly lit room. One of them grumbled, stepping further in. In that moment, desperation surged through Sarah. She said to Daisy, leading her toward the back of the lodge, if they could find an exit, they might just make it. The men were still searching, their voices rising and falling like ghosts, blending with the tension thick in the air. Another shouted as they began to close in. With rapid breaths, Sarah guided Daisy toward a small window at the back, light filtering through the dusty glass. She urged, scrambling toward the window, but just then a loud shove caused the door to slam open. The men charged in, expressions twisted in anger. Sarah felt her heart plummet. She screamed as she reached for the window, feeling panic clawing at her throat, but in that moment Daisy's instincts kicked in. The mare bolted toward the door, desperate and strong. "No, Daisy." Sarah cried, but it was too late. As the mare bolted outside, the men shifted attention, their eyes snapping to Daisy. With hope and fear intertwining, Sarah struggled to follow, hearing the men's shouts echoing behind them. One yelled. With fire in her belly, Sarah dashed after Daisy, adrenaline spurring her on. They burst into the night air, the woods surrounding them alive and breathing. She shouted, spotting a narrow path that led deeper into the trees. With Daisy galloping away from the cabin, fear surged anew. She urged, feeling the weight of the man's fury still behind them. But they raced onward, ducking and weaving through the trees, Sarah's heart pounding against her ribs. Each shadow felt alive, every rustle in the brush a reminder of the danger pursuing her. They burst through the woods, wind whipping through their hair, until finally they broke into the clearing that opened up to the pasture. The warm moonlight spilled over the field, illuminating the path back home. Almost there, Sarah yelled, gripping Daisy tightly. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its familiar outline a beacon in the night. But as they neared the porch, she spotted the two men emerging from the woods, eyes filled with determination. "She's there," one man yelled furiously. "Run, Daisy," Sarah shouted, adrenaline merging with fear as they raced toward safety. With everything she had, she urged Daisy into a final sprint, the familiar sight of home giving her strength. Just as they reached the porch, Sarah sprang off, yelling, "Mom," but time felt frozen. Would they make it? At that moment, her father appeared, his face pale but determined. He commanded, his voice strong as he stepped forward, shielding her from the threat. The men advanced, but the anger on her father's face was unwavering. He shouted, standing as a solid wall against them. "Look what we have here," one of the men sneered, stepping closer, but her father held firm. In that moment, the air was electric. Sarah could see the tension building, their breaths mingling in the thick darkness. They had fought through the night, and now, as the stars twinkled above like witnesses, they stood strong together. With a final glance back, the men took a step away. "This isn't over," one muttered, retreating back into the shadows, the weight of their threat still lingering in the air. As they left, relief washed over Sarah like a warm blanket. She felt the world begin to settle again, her family surrounding her, arms reaching out and pulling her close, grounding her. Her mother asked, her eyes wide with concern. "I am fine," Sarah stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Not anymore," her father reassured her, squeezing her shoulder firmly. In that moment, Sarah felt invincible. They had faced fear together, protecting one another from what threatened to tear them apart. It had been terrifying, but the strength of their bond shone brighter than any darkness that sought to overwhelm them. As they stood on the porch, the night faded into peace. The barn, once a place of hiding, now felt like a sanctuary again, a reminder of their resilience, their love, and the bonds that could withstand anything. Sarah looked at Daisy, who stood braced and proud. "You kept me safe, girl," she whispered, hugging the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of her presence. Together they had faced the night, and together they would face whatever tomorrow might bring. With her family by her side and Daisy as her companion, Sarah knew she had the courage to confront anything that might come their way. The light of day was just around the corner, and with it would come hope, strength, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The barn door creaked as Sarah slipped inside, heart racing like a drum in her chest. She leaned back against the cool wood, trying to catch her breath. Outside, the sun had dipped low, spilling orange and purple across the horizon just as shadows began to weave through the trees. But that beauty felt distant now. The warmth of the day had turned into a chill, and danger lurked just outside the weathered wooden door. Moments earlier, she'd been on her beloved horse, Daisy, riding across the expansive fields of her family's farm. The wind had tugged at her hair, and everything had felt right in the world. But then she had seen them two men standing by the fence, their faces twisted with suspicion and intent. She felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. Something was wrong. One of the men had shouted, and panic surged within her. In an instant, her idyllic world shattered like glass. With adrenaline spurring her on, she had raced to the barn, seeking refuge among the familiar hay bales. The barn had always been her sanctuary, a place where she found solace with Daisy. But now it felt like a trap, a dark hiding spot where fear and uncertainty swirled. As Sarah crouched low, heart hammering, she strained to listen. The men were outside, frustration painted on their faces as they shouted to one another. Split up, panic coiled around her, tightening its grip. How had it come to this? Why were they looking for her? Just thoughts of their intentions made her stomach churn. Suddenly, Daisy let out a loud whinny, a familiar sound that echoed against the barn walls. The moment felt suspended in time. She hissed, fear flooding her voice, but Daisy didn't understand. The horse was simply reacting to the tension in the air, and before Sarah could move, the men turned sharply towards the barn. One of them asked, urgency in his tone. Terror flooded Sarah's veins. She pressed herself further into the shadows, holding her breath as the men stepped inside. One of them barked, pointing toward the hay bales. With a surge of panic, Sarah scrambled deeper into the barn, desperate to stay hidden. But soon the men were looming closer, their voices punctuating the silence. "She's just a kid." The tension was palpable. Each heartbeat felt like an echo against the wooden walls. She stayed low, listening as the men's footsteps creaked on the barn's floorboards. Daisy whinnied again, a sound of pure fear, and Sarah's heart dropped. "No," she whispered, fighting the urge to scream. She glanced toward the stall, feeling the weight of both fear and love for her horse. One man shouted, urgency filtering through his voice. In that moment, her instincts screamed that she couldn't wait any longer. They had to escape. She was about to charge toward the door when suddenly the barn burst open, letting in the fading light of the evening. The other man shouted. Without thinking, Sarah dashed away from her hiding spot. She felt her legs move like a blur as she bolted toward the barn door, the world outside glowing with the last of the day's light, a beacon of hope. But as she raced for freedom, she felt a hand grab her shoulder. Everything stopped. In a move born from sheer desperation, she twisted away, pushing herself forward into the cool air outside. She shouted to herself, willing her legs to move faster. The grassy field stretched endlessly ahead of her, and she could hear the men yelling behind her. One yelled. With a burst of energy, Sarah reached the fence where Daisy stood waiting, eyes wide with panic. She cried, swinging onto the mare's back. The moment she was settled, Daisy surged forward, hooves pounding against the ground. Sarah shouted, adrenaline coursing through her, but as they ran, she felt a flicker of doubt. Would they catch up? Could they really get away? She yelled, urging Daisy on. The rush of the wind against her skin drowned out her fear, but she kept glancing back, heart pounding as the men's voices echoed like thunder. But Daisy was strong. She galloped like the wind, each stride pulling Sarah further away from the terror looming behind them. They dashed toward the edge of the woods, and for a moment the thrill of the chase sparked a sense of freedom within her. As they reached the tree line, Sarah felt a shift in the air. The overwhelming sounds of danger faded, becoming muffled as they plunged into the shadows of the forest. "We did it," she breathed, heart still racing. But that moment of relief was short-lived. Daisy suddenly halted, ears twitching nervously. Sarah whispered, feeling a new wave of fear creeping back. A voice shouted from behind them, and Sarah's heart sank. They hadn't lost them. A man yelled. She urged Daisy, but the horse hesitated, sensing the fear in her rider as well as the danger lurking just outside the trees. "Please, Daisy," Sarah pleaded, and with a single jolt, Daisy bounded forward once more, pushing through branches and over roots as they raced deeper into the forest. The woods became a maze of shadows, the night wrapping tightly around them. Sarah's instincts kicked in, and she knew they had to find a place to lay low. She spotted a clearing ahead with thick underbrush that might conceal them. She yelled, guiding Daisy toward it. They plunged into the dense thicket just as footsteps thudded against the ground, the men crashing through the woods, calling for her in frantic tones. She can't have gone far. Panic grew within Sarah as she pressed her back against a thick tree trunk. She could hear their voices, hear their angry shouts cutting through the air. She ordered, patting her horse, but the anxiety coursing through her was palpable. Then, just as the men drew nearer, Daisy whinnied softly, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. Sarah felt her heart race. "No, right there," one yelled, and fear ignited within her. "Run, Daisy," Sarah screamed, no longer waiting for a moment of hesitation. They burst back into the open, and she felt the night air rush around them. The harsh sounds of pursuit echoed behind her as they galloped forward, the moonlight guiding their path. Out of the woods, she shouted, her heart thundering in her chest. But as they emerged into the open field, they could see the farmhouse in the distance, a silhouette against the darkening sky. Hope surged within her, but realization quickly set in. Not yet. With adrenaline surging, Sarah urged Daisy onward. "Come on, girl." She could hear the men's footsteps crashing against the earth. One shouted, anger pouring from his voice, driving Sarah's determination higher. Suddenly, Daisy stumbled, her hooves skidding against the uneven ground. Sarah felt the wave of fear wash over her. "Come on," she urged, squeezing her legs around the mare. With one last push, Daisy's powerful legs surged forward, and they shot across the field like lightning. As they reached the porch, Sarah leaped from Daisy's back, taking the steps two at a time. "Mom," she cried, desperation filling her voice. The door swung open, revealing her father's worried face. His expression shifted to a mixture of fear and relief. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice a commanding force. Just then the men emerged from the tree line, their anger palpable as they hurried toward the house. One yelled, pointing directly at Sarah, but her father stepped forward, shielding her. He declared, his eyes fierce. Her blood ran ice cold, and for a moment she felt time freeze. The threat loomed large, and Sarah's world narrowed down to one breathless moment. She didn't know what they wanted, but her father had always taught her that family would protect each other no matter what. He ordered again, voice firm, his stance unyielding. Fear gripped her stomach again, but she felt something else simmering beneath courage. In that moment, her family was her strength. "We can't let them win," she whispered to herself, feeling the fight rise within her. With roaring anger, one of the men charged forward, but her father didn't flinch. "You need to leave." Something in that voice, steady and true, sent a ripple through her. He continued, eyes blazing with fiery determination. As the men halted, the tension hung thick in the air. Sarah could feel her heart pounding, a drum of defiance urging her to stand firm. One of the men shouted, frustration bubbling over. Her father bellowed again, cutting off his words. The men hesitated, looking between her father and Sarah. In that moment, Sarah could see their wavering confidence, the anger melting away into uncertainty. And just like that, the men took a step back. "This isn't over," one muttered, and with that they retreated back toward the woods, their shadows stretching into the darkness. As they disappeared, relief flooded over her like a wave. She felt her body relax, exhaustion creeping in, and yet a new strength filled her spirit. She was safe. Her mother rushed out, eyes filled with tears of relief as she enveloped her in a hug. "I was so worried." "Yeah," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by gratitude. She turned to see her father now beside her, arms crossed and protective. "We'll always protect you," he said, and those words held a power that melted away her fears. The love that surrounded her felt like an unbreakable shield, shielding her from the darkness that had crept so close. As they stepped onto the porch, Sarah looked back at the barn. It was still standing, a silent witness to the chaos they had faced, but it also held memories of laughter, joy, and countless moments shared with her family and Daisy. "Hey girl," she whispered, wrapping her arms around Daisy's neck, feeling the warmth of her horse's breath against her skin. In that quiet moment, she realized they hadn't just escaped danger, they had strengthened the bonds that tied them together. The world might seem overwhelmingly scary, but as long as they were a family and together, they could conquer anything. As the night settled in, the stars began to twinkle like guardians above them. Sarah knew with a deep certainty that love would always light their path, leading them through whatever shadows life might cast. With her family by her side and Daisy as her steadfast companion, she felt ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The barn door creaked open, barely whispering against the cool evening air. Sarah slipped inside, her heart pounding louder than the footsteps she left behind. The scent of hay and the distant warmth of her horse, Daisy, surrounded her, but the weight of fear hung heavy in the air. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows that stretched and twisted like dark fingers clawing at her. She pressed her back against the rough wooden wall, chest heaving as she fought to steady her racing thoughts. Just minutes ago, she had been riding through the wide-open fields, feeling the thrill of freedom as Daisy galloped beneath her. There had been no worries, only the two of them and the endless sky. But that sense of tranquility shattered when she spotted the two men lurking by the edge of the farm, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. They had been scanning the area, searching, and suddenly her picturesque world had turned chaotic. She had overheard one of them say, the urgency in his voice sending a chill down her spine. Now they were here close, too close, and she needed to find a way to hide. Her sanctuary had become a prison, filled with shadows that felt alive, creeping closer with every tick of the clock-like heartbeat in her ears. A voice broke the silence from outside, frustration weaving through every word. Fear tightened its grip around her chest, making it hard to breathe. She needed to hide, but where? The hay bales loomed like sentinels, offering her only partial cover. Daisy whinnied softly, her usual gentle sound sending panic surging in Sarah's chest. "No," she gasped, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth, but it was too late. That innocent sound had betrayed her. The door swung open, the harsh light flooding in as one of the men stepped inside, eyes scanning the dark corners. His voice held a mix of anger and determination. With her heart thumping fiercely, Sarah crouched lower, praying to remain invisible. But the barn, once her cherished retreat, felt like a ticking time bomb. Every creak of the floorboards beneath the man's boots echoed through her thoughts, amplifying her fear. He shouted, and the other man rushed in behind him. Instinct took over. Sarah hurled herself from her hiding spot, scrambling toward the exit. She pushed through the door, breathless, just as the men shouted behind her. The world outside felt bright and overwhelming, a stark contrast to the darkness inside the barn. Sarah bolted across the field, the grass brushing against her bare legs, and Daisy stood waiting by the fence, eyes wide with concern. She leaped onto the mare's back, and with a surge of power they took off, hooves pounding against the earth. "Faster," she cried, adrenaline racing through her veins as Daisy galloped away from the chaos. But the thrill of escape quickly spiraled into fear as she heard the angry voices trailing behind them. The words echoed in her ears, a chilling reminder of the danger close behind. They thundered into the woods, the trees whipping past them like a blur. As they plunged deeper into the forest, the shadows grew, and Sarah felt the weight of her panic press down. Her heart raced faster than their hooves, and the rustling of leaves felt like whispers of doom. Daisy was strong, but so much uncertainty piled up as they navigated through the tangled branches. Sarah urged, her voice barely a whisper. When they burst into a clearing, a sense of momentary calm washed over her. She could hear the distant sounds of the men, their frustrated shouts fading behind them. "Maybe we lost them," she breathed, looking around for a place to take refuge. The clearing didn't seem safe enough, and panic flared again as she spotted a dilapidated barn on the other side of the field. She pointed urgently to Daisy. As they raced toward the old barn, Sarah's mind flooded with memories of times past. This had once been a place of joy where laughter and the exuberance of youth echoed off the walls. But now it was a sanctuary of desperation, a place to hide away from the encroaching shadow. With a frantic leap, they entered, seeking shelter. The sunlight was dim, filtering through the cracks, illuminating motes of dust hanging in the air. "We have to be quiet," she murmured, pressing her forehead against Daisy's neck, whispering promises of safety. But just as she spoke, Daisy let out a nervous whinny, her voice too loud in the silence. One of the men shouted from outside, and panic surged anew. Sarah squeezed Daisy's reins, feeling her horse tremble beneath her. With danger threatening at every turn, Sarah pushed deeper into the barn, searching for a place to hide. Shadows danced around her, the air thick with dust and tension. Daisy's eyes were wide as she stood rooted, sensing the danger surrounding them. "Calm down, Daisy," Sarah whispered. The bond between them was fierce, forged through countless adventures shared in the vast fields of the farm, and this moment called for every ounce of trust they had built together. But then she heard the creak of footsteps outside. Sound of rustling hay echoed as the men entered the barn, their voices mixing with the creeping sense of dread. One shouted urgency threading through his words. Time stretched like an elastic band ready to snap as Sarah's heart raced. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but she couldn't leave Daisy behind. Just then she spotted a trapdoor tucked away in one corner, nearly hidden beneath years of dirt and neglect. In that moment of desperation, she led Daisy toward it. "We can hide down there." As they slipped through the door, the men's footsteps grew nearer, filling the barn's space with their sinister energy. The trapdoor creaked ominously, but they were safe for the moment. The dark, stale air surrounded them, wrapping around her like a thick blanket. She held her breath, listening as the men searched the barn above. "She can't just disappear," one of them yelled in frustration. Sarah pressed her fingertips against Daisy's neck, trying to calm them both. Minutes passed, each second heavy with silence. But just when Sarah thought they might be safe, she heard something, a distinct creak from above. One voice boomed, "No way." She could sense their growing certainty, and dread coiled tighter around her heart. Adrenaline surged within Sarah, and she lunged for the trapdoor, pushing against it, ready to bolt. But just as she turned, there were footsteps, thudding against the floor as the men confirmed their fears. She hissed, scrambling toward the exit. Just as Sarah pushed through, the trapdoor swung open wide, a shocking burst of light flooding the room. She barely had time to register the shock of finding herself face to face with one of the men. He shouted as Sarah dove to the side, narrowly escaping his grasp. In sheer survival mode, she dashed out of the barn into the open meadow, hearing the men's footsteps behind her growing louder. They shouted urgency, driving them closer. She urged, feeling the heat of fear behind them. They sprinted across the field, the night alive with tension and chaos. Every beat of Daisy's hooves sounded drumbeats, amplifying the danger. Fear clawed at her, threatening to overwhelm her senses, but she fought against it, urging the mare to go faster. As they reached the edge of the woods, the silhouettes of trees hovered like ancient guardians. She yelled, guiding Daisy to the shadows, hoping they could hide among the branches. They dashed deeper into the woods, each heartbeat matching the rhythm of their flight. But Sarah's heart sank as she felt Daisy slow, her powerful legs becoming weary under the stress of the chase. "Keep going, girl." Suddenly, a loud crashing sound came from behind them. The men had burst into the woods, voices echoing as they tore through the leaves. "She's close." With panic coursing through her veins, Sarah scrambled for a place to hide. She spotted a thick bush, the leaves thick enough to conceal them. She pointed, nearly pleading as they dove behind it. They pressed low, hearts racing, holding their breath as the men came closer, footsteps crackling through the underbrush. Silence enveloped them, the world narrowing to just the thorns digging into Sarah's skin. One man shouted, frustration spilling from his words as they passed just a few feet away. Sarah clutched Daisy's mane, feeling the horse tremble beneath her hand. The men paused nearby, whispering among themselves about where she might be. Checked the trees. With a rush of fear, Sarah felt her heart thrumming like an engine, but they stayed quiet, focused on the voices around them. Desperation painted her thoughts as she racked her mind for what to do next. They couldn't stay here forever. Even as the men's voices dissipated down another path, a sense of urgency remained. Sarah glanced up, scanning for an escape. Suddenly there was a loud rustle, the kind that sent shockwaves through the calm. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, dread flooding her senses. The men were back. One asked sharply, their voices carrying through the trees, now tinged with anticipation. A noise came from this direction, another whispered, and fear settled heavily in Sarah's stomach. In that moment, Sarah felt a rush of defiance surge through her. She couldn't let them take her. She took a deep breath, knowing if they were found, it wouldn't just be her fear at stake, it would be Daisy's life too. "Now's our chance," she whispered to Daisy, who stood beside her, eyes rolling in fear. With all her strength, Sarah pushed from the thicket, propelling herself into a sprint. "Run, Daisy." In the chaos of the chase, as the men barreled toward them, Sarah felt a fresh wave of panic wash over her. They were so close. With a final burst of energy, Daisy leaped forward, but the ground was uneven. Sarah felt the world tilt, and in a shocking moment, they both fell. Everything crashed, their bodies hitting the ground in a cloud of dirt and chaos. Sarah screamed, scrambling to her feet as Daisy stumbled beside her. The men were closing in, and adrenaline fueled her resolve. She shouted, urging Daisy forward as they dashed toward the edge of the field toward safety, or towards more danger. But every ounce of strength felt like it was fading. She glanced back just in time to see one of the men grab a hold of Daisy's reins. Sarah cried as she felt her heart drop. The world around her blurred as she fought against the pull of despair. With all her might, she tugged on the reins, but the man was strong, pulling Daisy backward. He said, his voice dripping with malice. And in that moment, everything began to spiral. Uncertainty rushed within her, flooding her mind. Would she really lose everything? She screamed, feeling tears prick at her eyes. But Daisy, sensing the urgency, bucked fiercely, breaking free from the man's grip as Sarah jumped on, gripping her mane tightly. With one final lunge, they surged forward together, the world stretching out before her like a shimmering, vast promise. Don't look back. Sarah urged, feeling the weight of the world behind them, but freedom lay ahead. As they raced across the final stretch toward the farmhouse, Sarah's heart seized. Then, glancing back, she saw the men reeling with anger, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkness. Daisy, carrying her forward with all her energy, kicked up dust as they soared toward the porch, but every heartbeat felt like a countdown. And just as they reached the steps, a sudden flash of motion caught Sarah's eye-dark shapes emerging from the trees. The threat hadn't dissipated, it was morphing, palpable, looming right over them. "Mom," she screamed, but as the men charged forward, intent on claiming their prize, the world around her spiraled into chaos, and everything she loved teetered on the edge. All her hopes, dreams, and the very essence of who she was hung in the balance as she faced the darkness charging forward. Would she lose everything she fought to protect? Would this be the end of her freedom and her future? The cliff became a precipice of uncertainty, and in that moment she understood. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everything she ever cared about. As the shadows loomed closer, the struggle was far from over.